Hello and welcome everyone. We are back for May's edition of the PvP tier list for Star Wars The Old Republic. We're going to go ahead and jump into it. This one might be a little bit longer. I just want to kind of go through my explanation as far as why I am ranking the classes I am. So as you know, the way I look at the tier list is a little bit different than a lot of people do. A lot of people do just on class power. I tend to think of it, if you were queuing for 8v8s as a solo queue, how much value are you going to get out of the certain spec? And we'll kind of go through that as we choose them. So first up, we have Lightning. Lightning is our quintessential OK spec. It does damage, does good damage, has good burst, pretty much does everything good, has good mobility. The problem why Lightning isn't higher is because there are just classes that do everything Lightning does, but better. Its defensives aren't great. Its ability to solo people in a 1v1 situation with all their cooldowns up and still continue to fight isn't great. Lightning has a lot of flaws, but it can also put out good damage. It is the quintessential average spec right now. Next, we're moving to Marksman. Marksman is in the D tier. So Marksman doesn't bring anything of value to a PvP besides damage. And that's the problem. Its survivability is absolute garbage. There are specs that do just as much damage, if not more, with better survivability. So when you're queuing Marksman, frankly, you're kind of basically playing the game on hard mode at that point. It just doesn't do anything better than the other specs. The only thing you could possibly kind of sell me on is that Marksman does hard counter some melee options out there. But a lot of the melee options now have ways around the Marksman routes and its slows and everything. So it's kind of hard to say. It's not really a good argument right now. Marksman just doesn't do enough. It doesn't have survivability on its own. Its 1v1 potential isn't great. There really isn't anything that it does besides bringing damage, and that damage is just eclipsed by so many other classes. There's no utility in the spec at all. No, Marksman's in our solid D tier. Next, we're looking at Carnage. Carnage used to be very, very good. There's been some changes and stuff and some things that people have figured out in the meta that has really brought Carnage down. So Carnage has always been susceptible to CC. So any type of crowd control effects really brings Carnage down. Currently, Carnage is a little bit better than Lightning just because it does have utility with predation. But other than that, Carnage is, again, just bringing damage. It has good defensives. But as you can see, there's other classes that are just straight up outperforming it right now. As you can see when we go through the tier list, I'm going to be a little bit more harsher on specs because I believe there's a clear separation at this point. At this point, I think everything's pretty much solved and we pretty much know where everything is sitting. I don't think it's going to change until we get some type of update. Next, we have Concealment. Concealment suffers from the same problem that Carnage does, but it's a little bit less. It's just doesn't have the defensives that Carnage does, so it's a little bit worse. I mean, an 8v8 mentality, you can get a little bit more value out of Concealment than you would out of Lightning. But I just think Carnage still brings more. Carnage still, in a vacuum, has a potential to carry games if you can really pop off on Carnage, if just the stars align right. I don't ever see Concealment just hard carrying a game anymore. Their defensives just aren't very good. They can pressure points, but there's other specs that just do it better. Sure, they can stealth around and guard, but again, other specs do it better. There's nothing that Concealment does right now that the other op specs don't do better. And that's kind of why it's in the average tier. I mean, you can certainly play it. It's playable. It's just not going to wow your socks off. Next, we have Hatred. Again, a lot of people are going to hate this decision, but Hatred's just in the C tier. Hatred brings damage. Its utility is lackluster. If you're just queuing into ACVH by yourself, without any heals, without any support, Hatred gets focused down so easily. You can pop off on Hatred. We've definitely seen it. Hatred's damage numbers are very good. We all know if Hatred is left alone, it can hit some ridiculous AoE damage numbers and damage farm and has good DPS. The problem is Hatred doesn't get left alone. As Hatred, you are going to get focused by any remotely good teams. If the team is bad, oh yeah, you can pop off on Hatred. A lot of the skill has kind of waned over the years, so Hatred right now is looking better than it should, if that makes sense. I just don't think Hatred doesn't scare me. When I see a Hatred sin, I'm not like, oh, I have to outplay something. I'm usually like, oh, I'll focus it down, and it won't be able to do anything. It's kind of how I view with Hatred. It's just not very good as being focused. If someone on the other team knows to focus down the Hatred Sin, Hatred kind of loses all its value. It doesn't bring anything else other than the DPS. Its stealth capabilities, its 1v1 potential isn't great. There's other classes that would just completely destroy it. So Hatred is still in the C tier. Next we have Vengeance. Now Vengeance is an interesting spec. I've gone back and forth between Vengeance being an A tier to B tier. It's hard to say. You can kind of put it wherever you want, but definitely I'm going to put Vengeance in the top of B tier right now. Like I said, I'm being very strict as far as what I consider in the absolute elite top tiers. So Vengeance, it brings good survivability, it brings oodles of damage, it brings taunt, it brings a lot of good stuff. So Vengeance in the high B tier makes sense. Definitely better than Carnage, Concealment, or Lightning. It almost makes me want to just shift all of those down. We'll take a look at it at the end. Kind of makes me want to shift all those down into C tier actually. Next we have Rage. I think Rage and Vengeance are both pretty close. Rage is probably a little bit better right now. I would honestly put Rage probably in our A tier at this point. Rage is a little bit better than Vengeance, not much. Like I said, they're very close. They bring about the same things to utility wise, and if you were queuing by yourself, both of them are better picks in the spec. I think that Rage is the better pick if you were just queuing solo. Vengeance is a little bit better if you have support. So it's just kind of up to you. It's a toss-up on that one. Next we have Madness. If you were queuing into Madness, Madness is S tier. Easy. You can queue Madness all day long and you will probably be one of the strongest classes in the game. You can be one of the best players in the game. Madness, it has damage, has survivability, everything you need. It can take care of itself. It doesn't need help. And that's the biggest thing. If you were queuing yourself into 8s and you don't, and it's a class that doesn't need help, doesn't rely on anything else, you are going to perform a lot better. Next, we have Pyrotech. Pyrotech is good, but it has gone down in my view just because Pyrotech doesn't pop off as much as you think it should. Just with the cleave games, it really needs support. And that's the biggest thing with Pyrotech right now. Pyrotech can definitely pop off. I've seen it put up numbers that are just insane. But Pyrotech needs something behind it. It needs a tank. It needs heals. If you're just queuing into it solo, into a vacuum, into 8s, I wouldn't play Pyrotech right now. Is it better than Carnage? Probably. Is it better than Concealment Lightning? Yeah. It's just not outstanding. You're going to have games where you completely pop off, and you're going to have games where you do absolutely nothing. It's a very hit and miss spec right now. Next, we have Fury. Fury is right behind Carnage. It's probably better than Concealment just because of the defensives. Like I said, it's bringing the same things that Carnage does, the utility with the predation, good defensives. The problem with Fury and the problem with just basically the Sentinel DPS classes, they're just undertuned right now. They're not doing enough. They should be doing more for the amount of effort that it takes. These classes are going to be taking all the CC, going to be taking all the damage, are going to be basically having their uptime is going to be a lot less than other classes. And their damage doesn't compensate for that right now. Sure, you can have pop-off games, just like anything in the B tier. You can really have pop-off games, anything in the B tier. It's just few and far between. It's just other classes do it easier is the biggest thing. Next, we have Engineering. Engineering has really moved up in my mind, basically because of its burst. I put Engineering at the top of B tier at this point. Engineering is solid. With the amount of burst that it has and the ability to really take over situations if it's left alone. Again, its survivability is awful, and that's why it's in the B tier. If it had any type of survivability or really good defensives, it would be higher, but it can get focused down very easy. It just does more faster than things like Pyrotech or Carnage or Fury. So Engineering, solid B tier, solid high B tier. I would definitely take Engineering over something like Pyrotech, Carnage, Fury, Concealment, Lightning. Definitely better than those. Really, it's kind of, Engineering in a weird way kind of feels like a better version of Lightning almost. It has better burst, has about the same survivability realistically, so Engineering is just straight up better. Next we have Annihilation. Annihilation's gotten worse. Annihilation continues to fall when I kind of look at it. The whole thing with Annihilation is Annihilation loves small skirmishes. So Annihilation loves your 2v2s, your 3v3s, your 1v1s. Annihilation loves to do things like that. It loves the smaller fights. A lot of now with our like Madness Orcs and the APs and the things like that. They love like these big fights, so they've been grouping up more. We've been seeing more tanks. We've been seeing lethality being really strong. So they've just been trying to dot spread. Annihilation really isn't a dot spreading class. Its dot spread is just weaker than every other class that does it. What Annihilation is good at is single target DPS pressure. It is amazing at that. The problem right now, the game is very going away from that. Plus, the nerfs to Annihilation's damage is really starting to catch up with it. It just isn't performing as well as it should. So I think it's a little bit below Hatred right now. Hatred just has more damage, and that's what Hatred is above it, even though Annihilation has a utility. Next, we have Advanced Prototype. Easy S tier. Advanced Prototype is, you can queue it by yourself, you don't need help. You can just run in there, you can press all your buttons, and you're probably going to get a kill. It's just how it works right now. You can just press all the buttons. You're probably going to kill them before they kill you, and that's generally a win. Because they're going to be respawned, and you're still going to be out there doing more damage. And if you actually know how to use AP, and you're kiting, and you're doing all the good things, you can stay alive for a very long time. You can put out a ridiculous amount of damage. You have good utility with your CC, your pulls, your movement speed. AP Bezla has everything right now. Survivability is actually pretty good, even with how it's kind of a little bit of a glass cannon, but just the ability to kite and its CC actually makes its survivability pretty decent. So AP is strong S tier. Next we have Arsenal. Arsenal I would put right behind Engineering at this point. Actually, Arsenal is probably actually in C tier, now that I start to think about it. I'm still kind of wondering about Arsenal, so let's take a look at it, because Arsenal's going to be in a weird place. So is Arsenal better than Carnage? I don't think so. Better than Fury? No. Better than Concealment? Yes. I think Arsenal's actually better than Concealment at this point. Yeah, I think it's somewhere there. So Arsenal is somewhere in the lower B tier. I was thinking about C tier, but it really isn't that bad. It's still got defensives, it's still got utility, it's still got net. It's a ranged class, so it's got survivability. Its damage just doesn't do enough, and that's the biggest thing with Arsenal. There are other ranged DPS specs that's coming up here pretty soon. You'll see just does more. Next we have Innovative Ordnance, again, better than Arsenal. You can flip-flop these two, but I think a well-played IO always beats well-played Arsenal. They're pretty similar, it's just IO has more damage. So I would go with IO over Arsenal right now. Next we have Virulence. Virulence is an A tier spec. If you want ranged DPS, you're really looking at Virulence. It also has some melee stuff thrown in there, but a lot of Virulence stuff is kind of ranged. So Virulence is good. Is it better than Rage? No, I don't think so. So solid A tier spec, brings utility, brings damage, good survivability, everything. You don't have to, like I said, you don't have to have support when you're queuing this. You can just pretty much queue it, play it, enjoy life. Lethality, easy S tier. Lethality has moved to the best spec in the game right now. AP is probably a little bit ahead of Madness too. But Lethality is just so good. All of its damage reduction, all its survivability, all its utility, its stealth, its high damage, everything. Lethality just does everything that every other class wishes it could do right now. I don't see there's a big gap, I think, between, basically Lethality, if there was an SS tier, I'd put Lethality up there. I think Lethality just separates itself from all the other classes right now. You're always going to get value out of this spec, no matter what the other team comp looks like. No matter anything, who you're queuing into, if you're queuing in pre-mades, if you're queuing against pre-mades, whatever, Lethality always brings value. Next we have Deception. Deception, again, I think Deception is better than Madness, like also in our S tier. So, Deception is very, very strong. Deception is very strong in the sense that as queuing as solo, and you are going to be playing against a lot of people who don't expect Deception's burst, and you can just 100 to 0 them and they won't know what's happening. That's what makes Deception so strong right now. Deception is probably a little bit weaker if we're looking at some type of like 8v8 or we were looking at a bunch of good people, then Deception does drop off. But in the current meta, the current skill level of the game, the current I log into the game, I queue up for a war zone, I play Deception, I melt people's faces. That's pretty much where Deception is right now. Now that we kind of got the DPS specs out of the way, as you see, there's a lot of DPS specs that are in that B tier, in the OK tier. that you can bring. Certainly there's a lot of them there. There's a few in the A tier, but the upper kind of echelon tier is just those force packs, and they've been there for a while. And it's pretty solved right now. The only thing you could argue is you could argue something like Madness and Deception, flip-flopping them in the order. But either way, I just think they both are going to bring value if you're just queuing by yourself. If we're talking about like a pre-made, probably Madness is better. At that point, AP lethality is probably what you would bring realistically if you're like in an actual pre-made. That's kind of a thing that I'm going to kind of do next. I'll tell you, and I have an idea is, next kind of content is, if you had an 8-man team, what would be the optimal 8-man team? And we'll kind of go into that and the reasons why. Basically harkening back to the 8v8 rank days that I used to play. Next, let's go ahead and continue with our tier list. We're going to go into our tanks. So our tanks are going to be pretty separated to Darkness. Darkness is a solid tank right now. So Darkness is in our B tier. Darkness right now is somewhere behind Vengeance. It's right there. It's sitting in solid B tier. It's in the top of B tier. I wouldn't put Darkness in A at all. It brings good, it's tanky, brings utility, it can do some things, it can do some cheesy stuff. That's really what Darkness is kind of sitting there, just because of how much it can cheese some points and some different things. It can do some weird cheesiness. So Darkness is in solid high B tier. Immortal, I think Jug Tank Immortal is right with Darkness. I mean, you can flip-flop them either way, it doesn't really matter. I think they're both relatively, as far as power level goes, if you're queuing by yourself, both fine. You can play either one of them. You're going to get the same value really out of each of them. The Juggernaut, you're going to be a little bit more damage, but if you know how to cheese on Darkness and you know how to kind of cheese some stuff, get around some mechanics of some other classes, and you can really make some other classes just basically fall off the map if you know what you're doing with Darkness. You can just interrupt and do some things and just be annoying. So as far as value in 8v8, I think they're both pretty similar. Shield Tech Tank, S tier. Easy. I don't see a reason why to play the other tanks right now. I think it's that big of a gap. I just don't think a tank 6 in A tier. I think Shield Tech is so much better than the other two. Just with its CC, its survivability, its damage output, everything Shield Tech does is better than the other two tanks. You always get value out of this. The taunts, the guards, the stuns, the pulls, everything, the mobility, everything Shield Tech does is just better than the other two tanks right now in PvP. Realistically, Shield Tech is probably the second best class in the game right now. It just is so strong. I don't see a reason why, like if you're really thinking about it, I just don't see a reason why you would bring the other two tanks. If you're queuing solo, I mean, of course you can play them, you can have fun with them if you enjoy those specs. That's the only real reason why. But if you're really playing for serious and you really want to win, you're playing Shield Tech. Next, we're going to look at the healers. So, Sword Healer is pretty decent. I would say that it's above our tanks right now. It's on our high B tier. It really is decent. There's nothing wrong with it. It is okay. It does what it needs to do. It can put out good heals. It has decent enough utility. It can fend for itself a little bit, but it really likes to be combined with a guard. Next, we have Operative Heals. I think Operative Heals are solid A tier. They're not broken like they used to be. The most annoying thing right now though is Shield Tech with Operative Healer. It's just annoying. The things that they can do, the amount of escapability, the area of effect control and stuff that the PT tank gives the Operative, where the Operative can just AoE down, stand in AoE, the PT can protect it and just disrupt and stun. That's just such an annoying combination right now. If you're playing with a friend and you guys want to run tank heals, just run the Shield Tech and the Operative Healer. PT and Operative Healer, it's just annoying to deal with. It's so hard to deal with. It really is right now. Next, we have Merc Healer. I'm going to put the Merc Healer a little bit above the Sword Healer, but not by much. The Merc Healer is a little bit more self-sufficient. But other than that, those two are actually pretty close right now. A well-played Sword Healer is probably a little bit better than a absolute top tier, like played Merc Healer. But if you're just but the Merc Healer is a lot easier. So the input that you have to do on a Sword to get to the Merc level is a lot more. So if you're looking at them at absolute maximum, I think Sword's a tiny bit better, but it's so close that I'm just going to go with the spec that's easier to play. And that's kind of another tier list I'm going to do. I'm just going to take a look at the hardest specs. It's another kind of idea. But these are the PvP tier list, just overall power rankings right now for May. You guys have any questions, comments, or anything, just go ahead and put it down there. Just remember, this is looking at it as you are queuing solo into an 8v8 situation. You can go against pre-made, you can go against noobs, you can go against anything. That's kind of where everything comes from the list that I take a look at it. Of course, the list is different if you're talking about serious PvP. The list completely changes, but that's some things I'm going to dive into a little bit later. And as always, thanks and have a good day.